Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second Get to Know Your State Forest webinar. My name is Sarah Corcoran. I'm the Forest Watch Coordinator for the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club. I am also the coordinator for Save Pennsylvania Forest, which is the group that is putting on this webinar series. We are really excited by all of the presenters that we have lined up. Last month, we had a presentation from Tyadotin State Forest. This month, we have Garrett Beers from Delaware State Forest, who's joining us. And next month, on April 27th, we will be having a forester from Michaud State Forest talking about his forest district. So as I said earlier, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat window at the bottom, and we'll get to them at the end of our presentation. Make sure that you are on mute for the entirety of the presentation. That way we don't have any feedback, and a copy of the recording will be given out to everyone who's registered today. So if you want to look over it again at any time, it will be available for folks to look at. So that being said, I will turn the presentation over to Garrett at this time, and let's learn something new today.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's a pretty cool idea to kind of do this little mini series here, kind of get to know your state forests. My name is Garrett Beers. I'm a service forester with the Department of Conservation, Natural Resources, Bureau of Forestry. I work in the Delaware State Forest primarily is my home district. That's 84,000 acres roughly between Monroe County and Pike County to the north. As a service forester, I primarily work with private forest landowners, timber management, wildlife habitat work, educational programs for kids, school groups, all those kinds of things. So I have a pretty diverse job. I also do some timber management on state forest and also a little bit of things with prescribed fire and wildfire as well. Okay, just a little bit of an overview of the DCNR Bureau of Forestry. For those who don't really know a lot about us, we're a state agency. We manage roughly 2.2 million acres across the state of Pennsylvania. Our roots go back to 1895 when we became the Division of Forestry, which later turned into DCNR after quite a few name changes through the last 100 years or so. The first land was purchased in 1898 in Clinton County, which is now part of the Sproul State Forest. So we've been purchasing land ever since, here and there, doing land swaps, those sort of things to kind of get to our current acreage and our current footprint. You can see there in the map, the Northeast Pennsylvania there. You see the Delaware State Forest there. We border Pennsylvania, or I should say we border New Jersey and a little bit of New York as well. We're kind of unique that a lot of the state forest land is situated in the north central part of the state, Toga, Bradford, Susquehanna, those counties up there. We have a pretty good contingent of land out here in the Northeast Pennsylvania, which is really nice for recreational purposes because we're so close to New York City, Philadelphia, New England, a lot of big metropolitan areas you can be in with a 2-hour drive. So we get a lot of recreation coming not only from Pennsylvania itself, but from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut as well. Here's a little bit of a map to kind of show you some of our state forest tracks we have here. It's kind of hard to see here in the screen. This is a public use map. I was just trying to cut and paste and actually attach it to this presentation. Some forms of reference there on the upper left-hand side of the screen. You can kind of see a little bit of Lake Wallenpaupack, which forms the western border of Pike County and the eastern border of Wayne County to the north. The right side of the screen's over around Milford, right where Milford, Pennsylvania meets New Jersey and also meets New York as well. And on the eastern side of Pennsylvania there, you can kind of see a little bit of the natural recreation area. That's Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. It's roughly 70,000 acres that's managed by National Park Service, and that's federally owned property as well. Most of the Delaware State Forest land is situated in that northern Monroe County, going through central Pike around the Route 402 corridor. If you're familiar with where that is, pretty much Stroudsburg way, going straight north, going up through Blooming Grove, headed up towards Shohola and that neighborhood. Okay. little bit of history of Delaware State Forest. The first land was purchased for Delaware State Forest. It was roughly 1,500 acres from a tax sale in June of 1898. 15 cents per acre. I wish I could find land for 15 cents an acre right now because I'd spend all my money to buy as much as I could possibly. We were actually the second land purchase in the state. We were kind of lucky, one of the first districts really around. By 1904, we were 53,000 acres. And a lot of this land was just land that was cut over by, you might have heard the phrase timber barons, robber barons. Huge timber companies went through clear-cut Pennsylvania a number of times between early 1600s and the last cutting, which is the late 1800s, early 1900s. Cut for everything from wood to build houses, build railroads, ties and supports for the mining industry around Scranton, those sorts of areas. Wood for making charcoal, chemicals, you name it, we pretty much extracted it from the forests over a course of 300 years or so from the first time we really settled Pennsylvania. Cool little localized picture is down there in the bottom. That's actually a picture that was taken on top of Big Pocono Mountain, which is it's actually the mountain that Camelback ski slope is. I'm sure a lot of you folks probably skied there at Camelback before. So you can see the kind of deforestation we had back then, the turn of the century. You can see there's no trees up there. It's pretty much just smaller scrub oak, blueberry, some huckleberry, some sorts of those kind of species. There's really no trees, and that's unfortunately what a lot of Pennsylvania looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I want to show a little bit of what we call ecoregions in Pennsylvania. Ecoregions, a lot of them are based off of the kind of parent material there. It's in the soil. Every area you have in Pennsylvania has a little bit different geological characteristics depending on how the land was formed. Was there river influence? Was there lifting of the plates, which formed the Ridge and Valley region? Was there glaciers? So we have a lot of really unique habitat types up here. We have like three real big major like landforms that really intersect at one little place. We have the glaciated low plateau, which comes down through Wayne County, through Pike into northern Monroe County. We have a little bit of what they're calling in here the Blue Mountain section, which comes up through Carbon County, western Monroe, into central Monroe. Then we also have what's known as a glaciated Pocono Plateau. That's the area around Goldsboro, Tobyhanna State Park, those sorts of areas headed west over towards Long Pond. So there's three real big different land formation types that are there. Really gives us a really good mix of different species. It's pretty crazy how you can go from one area that can have really poor quality growing sites, scrub oak, blueberry. You go a quarter mile away where the glaciers deposited a lot of sand and gravel. You can have beautiful black cherry, beautiful sugar maple. But again, it's all really dependent on the kind of soil that's underneath the topsoil. It's you can't change geology. It's what we have here, and certain species really love certain conditions. There's probably some smaller ecoregions too. If you get over towards Delaware Water Gap, you get a lot of really well-drained, very deep, high-quality soils, which are left from when the Delaware River moved its channels over the course of millions of years. You got a lot of that silt that was deposited out, made some really good soils as well. Okay. Delaware State Forest, I should say in DCNR in general, we manage a state forest system, what's known as ecosystem management. What we're really trying to do is manage for all aspects of the forest. We manage for everything from wildlife habitat, timber production, recreation, water quality, aesthetics, other social issues. We try to take all the attributes that you can manage a forest for and try to integrate them all into one comprehensive management plan that guides all our state forest districts. The big goal of ecosystem management is sustainability. That's huge. These lands out there are, they're there for public recreation. You want to see them persist for many, many generations, at least in the state they are, preferably in a better condition than we have them now. But again, it's forestry out there. Managing other state forests is always a dynamic environment. You have a lot of issues: wildfire, invasive species, invasive plants, forest insects and disease. There's a lot of things out there that are affecting our forests. We're hoping to let them in a better condition now for the next generation than we currently have them, so to speak. Again, with the ecosystem management perspective, our state forest lands are divided up into different management areas. Some areas are more geared towards timber management, some are more geared towards recreation, wildlife habitat, preserving certain areas with unique species. So a lot of different management schemes go on the state forest system overall. One of the big things now, Bureau of Forestry and the state forest system, is natural gas and oil exploration. Not so much oil anymore. The big push here the last 15 years is unconventional gas wells, which is usually known as fracking in layman's terms, targeting the Marcellus and the Utica shale formations that are underneath probably at least half of Pennsylvania. Currently, the Delaware River watershed, which is where the Delaware State Forest is located, we do not have any active fracking operations. Fracking actually has a moratorium on it through the Delaware Basin Commission. No fracking. Delaware State Forest itself, on our 84,000 acres, excuse me, we have 4,300 acres that have severed gas rights. What that means is the Bureau of Forestry does not hold those gas rights. They could be held by private individuals, private citizens that own the land before we acquired it. It could possibly be owned by larger petroleum exploration corporations. Once those gas rights are severed, they can be bought and sold like any commodity, and they can change hands a number of times. We currently have no natural gas wells operating in Delaware State Forest, but at one time we had exploratory wells drilled by Texaco back in 1972, 1973. The well they drilled did not have any gas in it. It was what's termed as a dry well. They drilled the well, found out there was no gas there. They walked away from the leases, turned it back over to the Bureau of Forestry. Some of the surrounding area in Delaware State Forest, there has been some recent gas testing. They call it seismic testing. They use explosive charges, and they listen to the sounds and returns that come out of the soil based on the kind of material that's underneath the ground surface. But as far as any kind of drilling activity, we're actually pretty lucky in the state. We do not have any in Monroe and Pike County currently. Delaware State Forest also have a pretty large timber program. Timber program in our district is divided into again management units based on what we consider our harvest allocation model. We're trying to get what we call like a balanced age class in the forest. We try to have forests that are 5 years old, 10 years old, all the way up to over 100, pushing 200 years old, just kind of in a way to kind of get our forest and have like a better habitat diversity for a lot of our native species that are out there. Because the species you're going to find in younger forests are not the species you're going to find using older forests. So if you want to have the diversity of species, you need to have a diversity of age classes out there in the landscape. Every year, our allocation on the Delaware State Forest is roughly 360 acres. That's what we try to harvest every year to kind of get our age classes more balanced so that we have that even aged forest out there. Last year in 2020, we harvested 378 acres on Delaware State Forest. That equated to about $275,000 in revenue. That revenue gets turned back into the state general fund, but we are lucky we get to keep 10% of that revenue for what we call regeneration purposes. That's everything from non-commercial treatments, herbicide for invasive species. We get to use it for deer exclosure fencing to protect our seedlings from deer. Anything you can use out there to grow the new forest back to make it easier, we're allowed to use that money from. So that 10% really helps, but it's be nice to have a little bit more than that, because in today's dollars, 10% doesn't really go a long way, especially when you deal with lower quality timber like we have here in Monroe County and Pike County. Every year, DCNR cuts about 12 to 14,000 acres of timber, depending on the year. Last year was a little bit smaller allocation. Not sure what the reason for that was. Could be something to deal with the whole COVID situation where we weren't working for 2 months or so. Again, last year we turned back into the state about $15 million. Again, we get part of that back to our regeneration funds so we can help manage our forests as well. Timber program is really important in the state. Timber industry, according to Pennsylvania State University, About 80,000 jobs are tied to it directly or indirectly in the logging industry. That could be anything from guys cutting timber in the woods, people selling equipment, fuel, chainsaws, hauling logs to the mills. So it has a very big impact, about $18 billion to the Pennsylvania economy, which is huge. Uh, that's local jobs. They can't really be exported overseas. Means a lot for those northern tier parts of the state where timber is very big and really adds a lot of money back to those smaller communities. Again, the timber program is what we really use to drive our habitat management, just for the fact that there's no way to create that younger forest without doing some kind of harvesting, prescribed fire, something like that, where it removes the overstory, the dominant trees, creates enough light to actually get down to the forest floor to actually make those seedlings to go and take the place of the trees we harvest. Use some different various harvest techniques here in Delaware State Forest. The two most common we use are what's known as the shelterwood harvest. It's something looks similar to this. This is actually a shelterwood harvest here, a picture of one of our operations. The first step of the harvest goes in there and moves a lot of trees that are poor quality species you don't want to have a seed source for, mainly birch. Red maple's pretty big. Beech is things we remove. Doesn't have a lot of wildlife value. Doesn't have a lot of timber value, so to speak. What the idea is to create a setting where seedlings can become established and they can really grow into a larger size where they can then compete with themselves and grow to become new trees. After the shelterwood process, the next harvest we do is what's known as overstory removal. This is one that was just finished up cutting here about a month ago. Looks kind of barren. A lot of the seedlings are broken down right now. There's a lot of bigger pieces of wood there. Kind of looks a little bit messy, but here, once this growing season really starts, those seedlings that were broken off are going to sprout back from the root system right below the surface of the ground. They're going to go up. They're going to reform the new forest. All that woody material there might look like a mess, but it's all nutrients that are going to break down, get recycled back into the soil, which are going to really fertilize a new crop of seedlings that are coming in to make the new crop of trees. Other thing too, they provide a lot of habitat for snakes, salamanders, other kind of insects. Bears love them. They get grubs and things like that. They go and pull those old logs apart. So they do form a really important habitat out there, and things, especially grouse. Grouse need what's known as a drumming log. When they're breeding, they like to get up there in those logs, shut around for the ladies, and they need to have those larger pieces of wood there to really complete their mating cycle. Again, you see a few trees that are left, very high quality trees, large canopies, produce a lot of seed, great wildlife species there. These are primarily white oaks here. Seeds are in the form of acorns are really desired by a lot of our wildlife species, and they're going to keep getting larger here, produce a lot more seed, be a good wildlife area here in the future. Be an awesome place here to hunt some woodcock, grouse here in probably about 2 to 3 years coming up. All our timber harvests in the state forest are certified through two different independent organizations. The first one is FSC, Forest Stewardship Council. And the other one is SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiative. They're both third-party agencies, or I should say, probably third-party vendors, you want to say, that actually go out and they certify our forests that they're sustainable, that they're meeting wildlife habitat, they're meeting socioeconomic markers as well. They're being sustainably harvested. All those sorts of things really show that we're doing a lot of good work out there managing timber. We have the certifications for, which really helps us a lot, especially with a lot of our material we sell. Since it's SFI and FSC certified, it can make its way to a lot of markets that you couldn't unless the wood was certified. Some of the big markets for that is Europe. And a lot of times you get any kind of mail, you turn over the backside of an envelope, you'll see the FSC or SFI logo on it. There's a big push for having wood that's sourced from sustainable forest right now. Okay, another management tactic we use a lot on the Delaware State Forest is prescribed fire. We mainly use that to improve wildlife habitat and also for timber production. We use prescribed fire mostly for wildlife habitat in the form of burning open areas. We have a lot of old log landings, herbaceous openings, meadow type environments. The goal with that is to knock out the more of the woody, the trees and things that start to move in there after a few years. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone here saw a field that lays fallow for a number of years. Nobody farms it. No one does anything. After a number of years, you start to see birch moves in, cherry, maple, those sorts of things, and eventually that field becomes a new forest. Our goal is to maintain those herbaceous openings in uh, native wildflowers, forbs, clovers, those sorts of things that really benefit wildlife, nesting as well as also foraging. So we use that fire to knock out those woody plants so that we can keep it in that grass type setting. We also use prescribed fire too as well for managing timber. We use it a lot in our timber sales to reduce the competition from birch, maple are the two biggest ones right there. The birch and maple grow a lot faster than our oaks and hickories. So if you allow those maples and birch to get out in front of those oaks and hickories, they shade them out, and they kill off our more desirable species we want to have for timber value, but also for the wildlife value as well. The oaks respond very well to fire. They have very thick bark. A lot of times they'll survive the wildfire themselves when thinner bark things such as cherry, red maple, birch, those sort of things are killed off. Tulip poplar pretty easily, but then they're killed off. But then the oaks and hickories will either withstand the fire because they're thick bark, or they will sprout back from the root systems, and then they'll actually form new trees above ground and keep on growing. So prescribed fire has a pretty big importance in a lot of our native species and how they actually grow and regenerate. Some popular recreation activities here on the Delaware State Forest. Probably the big ones is hunting, fishing, and trapping, which are really big here, especially that we're close to a lot of bigger metropolitan areas, gives people a lot of good opportunities. Camping and hiking are always big, but this year especially with the whole COVID pandemic, a lot of things were closed, so the forest was just inundated with people coming out, hiking, camping, backpacking, all over. There's people all over this spring and summer, and it doesn't look like it's really going to let up too much this year. Again, kayaking, boating are also popular, along with snowmobile and ATV. One thing there that pitch you'll probably realize that's a rattlesnake. If you're out there recreating in the Delaware State Forest, rattlesnakes are always an issue. From about that May timeframe all the way until middle of September to middle of October, depending on the weather, they are always out there. Just be careful. You probably walk by a lot of them, you don't even realize, but they are definitely out there. So with hunting is really, really big in the Delaware State Forest. A lot of opportunities for species you really can't find, a lot of smaller tracts of private land. Bear is huge. Bobcats and other ones became pretty popular the last few years. We have a good population of that. White-tailed deer is always a big one. And again, grouse and woodcock is pretty big as well, just for the fact that we do a lot of active forest management for younger forest, and those are kind of areas as grouse and woodcock really like. So there's a lot of pressure on them as well. Whole Delaware State Forest is open to hunting. Again, you just have to abide by the safety zones around our state forest lease cabins that are out there, neighboring structures, and some of our little maintenance shops we have scattered throughout the state forest. All lawful species may be hunted and pursued, whether it be coyotes at night, coyotes with dogs, deer hunting with archery, bear, bobcat, you name it, you can go out there, you can hunt it. Delaware State Forest. We also provide what's known as DMAP programs, deer management assistance programs. Some areas of the state forest, we have some really bad deer issues, especially areas that border larger human development areas, such as like East Stroudsburg Way, going from Pike towards Hemlock Farms and those sorts of areas, which would allow people to harvest additional does. Those tags are you're able to apply for those tags independently of the regular doe tag drawing. So that really is really popular. Again, hunting is the only way we can really control the deer in the Delaware State Forest. Deer pressure, some areas is way too much than the forest can handle. It really really affects a lot of the regeneration of our forest species. Some places you can't begin to get oak, maple, cherry to grow, sugar maple, all those sorts of things. the deer just come in and they mow off the seedlings. Deer can eat 5 pounds of browse in the wintertime. So, I mean, just picture a deer eating 5 pounds of little twigs every day. They have a lot of devastating effects on our forest. Again, hunting's allowed all the time in Delaware State Forest. Hunters wear orange, so you should as well. Unfortunately, there's accidents out there happen, so it's always good if you're out there in the hunting seasons, especially in the fall. Have that fluorescent orange on there just to make people aware that you're out there. Not saying anything will happen, but again, there's always that chance, so it's good to wear those orange colors. We have a lot of people that don't really think about hunting here, that come in from more of an urban area. You'll see them walking around in bear season with a black fleece jacket on and black fleece pants. That's not a good thing to do during bear season. So you have a lot of those issues. You see people doing that kind of thing. So if you're out there, just try to be cognizant of what kind of hunting seasons are out there and try to take appropriate actions and wear that fluorescent orange. Fishing is pretty popular here. We have a lot of smaller lakes that you can easily get to, throw a kayak in, canoe. A lot of the lakes are stocked with more either trout, or some actually have panfish stocking in them as well. Peck's Pond and Camp William Penn are two of our lakes. They're both catch and release currently. Peck's Pond Lake was drained for a number of years here to do some dam rehabilitation work. As a result, we're trying to build back fish population. And Camp William Penn is a really small lake, large pond, however you want to really describe it. And again, that's in their catch and release area, just for the fact that it's pretty easy to overfish that lake. One thing we do is we do not measure ice thickness in the wintertime for anyone out there that ice fishes. So it's kind of, you got to go out there, drill your holes, kind of see how thick the ice is yourself before you go out across the ice to start fishing. Popular fish to pursue in our lakes is largemouth bass, yellow perch, panfish, trout, and probably the official fish of Pike County is the pickerel. You can find them in every single lake we have, almost every single stream. They're all over the place. Kind of fun to catch, not that fun to take off the hook. Again, the streams we have, a bunch of our streams are actually stocked with trout. Trout stocking went on here a couple weeks ago in some of our areas. But again, we have a lot of streams, smaller streams that have native brook trout in them. Phenomenal fishing if you get into some of those like backcountry areas. Picture there on the right was actually a smaller stream that I took a picture of the other day. Doesn't look like much, but again, it holds nice native brook trout up to like 6 to 8 inches on them if you really want to get up there and do some fishing. Kind of a hard place to fish for the native brook trout, but it's well worth the time. Camping is been a very, very popular activity in Delaware State Forest the last year here with the whole COVID pandemic. People were out there camping all over the place. Most of the summer, all of our sites were booked up. Main sites we have that people use is what we call a motorized camping site. They're areas you can easily pull off the road with a car, truck. You can even back in like small camper to most of the sites. They're all free, which makes it kind of nice. You need a permit though. Permits can be available online from some of our sites, but if you contact your district office, one of us can write you a permit. The reason we require the permits is that we have a better accountability if there's any kind of natural disaster out there, tornadoes, fires, those sorts of things, so we know who's where. And again, it also gives us a little bit of a way to track down if there's an issue with people cut trees at the campsite, people left garbage. It's an easy way for us to go back and if the site is individuals, or try to get them to correct their actions. One thing about camping, you can go and camp what we call primitive camping. If you want to hike a trail system, you can take your backpack, you can hike 3, 4, 5, 10 miles back in along a trail, stop for the evening, find a nice little spot to camp, throw your tent out there, sleep, get up the next day, pack up, and that you do not need a permit for as long as you only stay one night. One thing with our motorized camping sites, there's no facilities provided. It's not like a commercial campground. There's no water hookups, there's no sewer, electric, any of that. You're pretty much out there. You have to be self-contained. Hiking is pretty popular here. We have a lot of smaller trail loops you can do throughout the state forest. The trails are in pretty good shape. We spent a lot of time the last year and a half going through them, cleaning up cleaning up logs and things that fell over them, brushing them out, cutting the mountain laurel and things that started to encroach in the trail. Excuse me. A lot of the trails too are freshly blazed with paint indicating the trail's designation where it's going, and also the color paint designates what kind of activities are allowed on the trail. The orange here is a hiking trail. You get some places you might find something like which is blue. Blue is for cross country. So the blazes colors actually mean a lot. They're pretty important to actually understand what kind of activities you can actually do on those trails. Thunder Swamp Trail is our largest trail in the state forests, or at least in this district. It's 26 miles long. It makes a pretty large loop. Has some little smaller connector trails that connect back on itself, but it's very popular for people that are what we call through hiking. They might park at one place and hike 15 miles to the end and pick up a vehicle there, then double back, pick their other vehicle up. Some really nice areas there. You go along some really nice streams that make some excellent places to do some trout fishing. A lot of the smaller streams that this trail goes along actually hold native brook trout. So it's a cool little place to do a small little hike, camp for a night, do a little bit of fishing, and then pick up the next day and finish the trail system. There's not a ton of elevation change on the Thunder Swamp Trail, so it's a pretty easy trail for people that don't want to really do some large elevations, steep terrain. This is really not the trail for that. It's relatively pretty flat and rolling terrain where it's located. Again, if you want to camp along the trail, as long as you're going to only stay for one night, you can camp there. That's fine without a permit. Boating is pretty popular activity too. A lot of our lakes, most of them have boat launches on them that are really easy to get to. All your boats need to either be A, registered, or B, have a launch permit. The registrations is normal registration you get for a motorized boat through Fish and Boat Commission. The launch permit itself is used on smaller craft that you don't need to normally register, such as canoes, kayaks that do not have a motor on them. The launch permits, I believe, are $20, and they're good for 2 years if you buy the 2-year permit. So it's pretty easy to do. Buy them. You can buy them online. You can buy them at a lot of hunting and fishing license issuing places. Makes it pretty easy. You just a sticker you put in the side of your boat, and you're good to go. And that launch permit is also good if you go to any other state forest, any state park, and also if you try to launch a boat from any Fish and Boat Commission property as well. Same as all those areas, need to have either registration or have a launch permit to use stuff on those lakes. Thing here in our lakes is similar to most of the state parks, where you cannot have a gas motor. If you're out there, you're going to have an electric motor, such as a trolling motor, or again, sailboat's fine, or just break out the good old-fashioned paddle. But most of our lakes anyway, most of them are natural, very shallow water. Not really the kind of place you want to bring a boat with a motor anyway. You probably end up doing more damage to your motor than you would actually really gain. A lot of these lakes you can easily paddle around with a kayak or canoe, no problem. Snowmobiling is also pretty popular activity up here when we get snow. This year was fantastic for snowmobiling. We actually had snow that lasted for almost 2 months. Some pretty good trail conditions. In our district, we have 115 miles of snowmobile trails, and 70 miles of those are actually groomed trails. That's a picture of our groomer down there. Similar to a groomer you'd see if you went to a mountain to go skiing or snowboarding. Same kind of deal. It works. Smooths out all the tracks, pulls snow to areas that started to melt, from areas that have too much snow. Works really good. Does a good job packing down the snow. So once the snow gets packed down, the sleds right across it pretty easily. And also too, once that snow packs and freezes, it becomes like a sheet of ice, and it just doesn't melt as easily as snow will by itself. Again, sleds have to be registered and insured to ride in our trail systems. Registration, we do honor some registrations from out of state states. Not sure what the really states we honor, but that can easily be looked up online. So we do use registrations for out of state as well. Most of our roads become snowmobile trails in the wintertime. They come joint in use between licensed vehicles such as a truck, but also snowmobiles at the same time too. So if you're out there driving around in the wintertime, If you have four-wheel drive or chains and you're out there driving, make sure watch out for sleds. Same thing for snowmobiling, watch out for vehicles. They're both out there using the same trails. Other popular activity is ATV riding. We have 3 trail systems on Delaware State Forest. We have the Dixon Miller Tract, which is 15.2 miles of trails. That's off Route 115 up by the Pocono Raceway. We have Burnt Mills Track, and we have Maple Run. Both those areas are in northern Pike County, off Route 402. Smaller trail systems, but the trail's pretty wide, pretty easy riding at Burnt Mills and Maple Run. Dixon Miller is a little bit more, a little bit of a harder ride, a little bit rougher trails, a little bit more steepness to them, a little bit just different riding, but stuff that pretty much any kind of amateur with a little bit of experience can tackle no problems. We do not allow side-by-side ATV or side-by-side UTV/ATVs. Everything has to be a normal ATV, and again, everything needs to be licensed and registered. As well, some of the trails are periodically closed throughout the course of the year due to hunting season, so it doesn't disturb wildlife. And again, some of our trail systems close. Mainly, I believe it's Burnt Mills closes in the wintertime, and Maple Run just for the fact that it's a snowmobile trail system as well. And the ATVs, unfortunately, really tear up the snowmobile trails, so we try to keep them off during the wintertime. It's a pretty good rundown of most of the activities, the big popular activities we have in the Delaware State Forest. If anybody has any other questions, concerns, you can feel free to shoot me an email, give me a phone call, and we can see about answering your questions. The address there on the screen is the one you're going to use if you're trying to come to our office to get a firewood permit or to get a camping permit. But again, we can issue those over the phone as well. That's pretty much all I have. You want to turn it over to questions now. I'm not sure if you have those questions or not, Sarah.
Yeah, I've had a few questions in chat. And if anyone has any further questions that they'd like to ask Garrett, please put them in the chat right now. We have about 15 minutes set aside for Q&A. We had a question about the trailblazes and whether or not the color coding at Delaware State Forest is the same as other state forest districts within the state.
Technically, the trail blazing should be the same color. Unfortunately, there is times when the trails have been blazed in the incorrect colors. Either a trail group did it wrong, a staff member did it wrong. Sometimes there's issues with the trail blazing. Most of ours are pretty darn good. If you're going to go out there to use a trail for majority, what people do is hiking. You can hike on any of the trails. That's fine. The issues come in if you're trying to ride a horse in a trail that's only for hiking itself, or try to ride a mountain bike. Those sort of things will happen. So if you're planning on using a trail for any of those more of a use than hiking, if you give us a shout here at our office, excuse me. I don't really handle a lot of the recreation myself here. I don't know what all the trails colors mean myself. But yeah, if you want to shoot us a phone call or an email like that, we can tell you if you're trying to use a trail for more of a intensive use than just regular hiking.
All right. Next question. How much do you rely on volunteers to help maintain the trails, and how would you go about becoming a volunteer for the state forest?
Okay, we do some volunteers. I believe it's the KTA, Keystone Trail Association, I think it is. I know we just always use the KTA. I know they do some work here. I think they just did Thunder Swamp here a few months ago. Did some blazing, I believe they brushed some of it out, cut some mountain laurel back and some logs around it. There's always recreation or opportunities for volunteers here. If you want to shoot me an email or a phone call, or throw it here in the chat, and I'll have our recreation forester get back to you with some of those volunteer opportunities.
On that as well, Garrett, what is the name of the recreation forester for Delaware State Forest?
His name is Julian Mazza.
I'll write that down myself. All right.
I can actually give if the individual's here for contacting Julian, I can give you his desk number actually here. See here, Mazza, Julian. Okay, Julian's number is Let me find it here. There it is. Okay, Julian's number is 570-213-1564. Once again, 570-213-1564.
And I just put that in the chat as well. So you can write that down in case you missed it. Let's see. That we have a couple of questions about timber harvesting within the forest. One participant wants to know if you've seen an increase in deer and invasives with the excess light in the woods from harvesting.
Yeah, the invasive issue is always a concern. Anytime you make more light out there, just disturb the forest soils a little bit. Seems like the biggest invasive we have actually is what's known as Japanese stiltgrass. You find it growing along roads everywhere. It travels very rapidly with the wind, and especially water and roadsides. That can make its way in there. It seems like once though you get the seedlings larger size, they start to really shade out the forest floor. A lot of those invasives drop out. But again, you can have an issue with the invasive species, no doubt. Any kind of disturbance out there, those invasive species really like to move in. Deer, I mean, they will congregate on some of our timber sales just for the fact that there's a lot of food there. You have a lot of those, especially here in the spring. The first thing that comes out is a lot of our native forbs, clovers, goldenrods, those sort of things come out of the soil. The deer love eating those because it's really the first new green growth in the spring. So they will congregate in those areas and do a lot of browsing on the seedlings and saplings as well. The deer is just a hard issue to deal with. That's why a lot of places we use what's known as a deer exclosure fence. You'll see them all around the state forest. It's areas where we have really too much deer impact for the seedlings, so we kind of keep the deer off them. So the seedlings can get to a point maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. The deer really can't browse them. Well, a lot of times what we do is we try to, like, if we can, make our timber sales kind of time in with existing areas of forage, other timber sales, where it kind of gives a deer a little bit more of an area to kind of go to feed, so not just focusing on one area. If you had 2 or 3 deer per square mile, which is a super low number, if you went into the middle of an undisturbed forest and made a 30 acre, or say you made a 200 acre timber sale, you would get inundated by deer. They know where food is, they flock there, especially in times when there's not a lot of mass crop out there in the form of acorns. Like this past fall, there's hardly anything out there to eat acorn wise. The deer just browse seedlings very, very hard, especially too when you had that 2.5 foot of snow we had. Why do you want to try to dig down to find a couple acorns that are left over when you can browse seedlings? So the deer will really focus in on the seedlings and do a lot of damage to them pretty fast. But again, we try to focus on areas that have existing seedlings already established on the ground. And again, areas we have a little bit lower deer numbers for timber sales.
We do have a few more questions about invasives, but I'll get the forestry timber questions out of the way first. Are there any areas of the forest that are set aside as non-harvestable?
We do. We have areas set aside. There's some areas we have set aside because they're not commercial to harvest. Very poor quality growing sites. You can't access them. You have too much shit to cross streams, really steep drainages. But we have areas that are specifically set aside for no harvests. We have, I think it's 4. It's at least 4. It might be 5. What we call natural areas, where areas we pretty much take a hands-off approach to managing. We'll venture into them, do a little bit of management if it's going to maintain the forest in its state. If there'd be a giant invasive problem, something like that. There's a fire, we go in there, suppress that. Those sort of things we will do, but there's no timber harvest in those. We do have one area which we pretty much take a complete hands-off approach. It's what's known as Stairway Wild Area. It's actually the picture I took there. They had in the front page of the presentation that overlook. That's actually taken from our Stairway Wild Area. That's almost completely hands-off, no management, so to speak. We will never cut timber there, most likely ever. We do have areas too. We do what's called an extended rotation. We're trying to really push it out there. Maybe areas that maybe get 200, 300, 400 years old in state forest as well. But we really have that 5 to 6 areas in the state forest here between natural areas and wild areas where it's pretty much strictly hands off, no timber management.
All right. In that regards, how do you select what areas of the forest are logged?
Some of that's a mix. One of the big ones we focus on areas in we call salvage, where if it's dead and dying timber, we did a lot of salvage work. We're actually still doing it right now from back in 2006, 2007, and 2008. Our areas in central Monroe and southern Pike had 3 big years of gypsy moth defoliation. We had thousands and thousands of acres of oak mortality. It killed almost all the oaks. We're actually still salvaging some of the dead oaks. So we'll try to salvage anything that dies from gypsy moth. We're doing a lot of salvaging work for ash. I'm sure a lot of the folks in this on the presentation have heard of emerald ash borer before. It's non-native invasive from Asia. It's wiping out our ash. So we did some preemptive salvage of that just to kind of get some mortality there, to kind of capture that so we could get some monetary return out of it, and also then kind of guide the forest to regenerating some more desirable species than just having the then that would happen if we just let the ash die and say invasives moved in. We usually focus on areas that where we have established forest regeneration, which usually areas that have lower deer numbers, places that already have oak seedlings established, where we can then come in, do some harvesting, get them a little bit more light, and they can just take off and grow. One thing with the oak, having seedlings on the ground is so important to go in there and do a timber harvest, because oak seedlings might build a giant root system up for 10, 15, 20 years, if not longer, just storing tons of energy and nutrients for a time when they get an opportunity to have full sunlight to grow. Historically, that opportunity would have been, say, a tornado damage, hurricane damage, where it blows trees down, ice storm, fire. We step in now and kind of manipulate it with the timber harvest to kind of get those seedlings to release. So we have a lot of different ways we pick the areas, but mostly the areas is based on any kind of salvage work that has to get done that's there. We have a lot too much dead timber there than we would like to naturally have there. And also, again, areas with forest regeneration. Those are the 2 big ones we pick in area.
All right. So going back to the emerald ash borer question, I know that I had said there were some on invasives. We will start with those now. One question was discussing aquatic invasives and if there's any concern about boats coming in from other regions spreading invasives in the water bodies in the state forest.
Yeah, that's always a big concern is invasives. I'm not have really much invasives here currently. I think we had at One River Lake some the water chestnut we had, and there might have been some other plant, I believe, maybe possibly. But yeah, that bringing not only boats but too like fishing waders and things like that can actually spread a lot of invasives. We don't really have any policies, so to speak, on that, but it's always advisable to, if you're going to bring your boats from one body of water to the next, drain them out before you leave the first body of water. Drain any kind of live wells you have in the boat. If you can hose the boat down, wash it down, that's awesome. Let the boat sit out and dry for a number of days to kill anything like that. All those things mean a lot. I know, like a lot of the hunting clubs I work with and land management stuff, like if you go there to fish in their streams, you either have to have a pair of waders that's strictly kept at the club for club fishing there. They do not leave. They have to come in as brand new equipment. Or if some that allow you to bring equipment, you actually have to wash them down with a bleach solution after before you wash them, so that way you kill any kind of aquatics that would be on there. One of the big ones they're talking about is it's called rock snot. It's kind of like this like gelatinous kind of like slimy algae type thing that can really take over streams. So it's always a concern. We probably should maybe have a little bit of more of a policy on it, but it's one of the things that is, excuse me, how do you really police it's the hard thing, unfortunately. Another thing too you see about invasives is people bringing bait from places. I know one thing that they always talk about is like the rusty crayfish that places have. Other places they do too, people try to use like they might trap minnows, like those little gobies and things like that are in the Great Lakes. So those things are pretty easy to move around if you're really not careful and not cognizant of what you're actually doing.
Next question is about the emerald ash borer. How much of an impact has the emerald ash borer had in the area, and what's the forecast of its effect for the next 10 years or so?
We are really seeing the effects of it here the last, probably the last year in our district here. First was officially discovered in Monroe County around Route 80. I actually found it here. I think it was 2017, spring of 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21. So 4 years ago now. The western and southwestern Monroe County ash is probably at like 75% mortality. Same with Western Pike, maybe at 25%, but it's working across our district. I'd say within the next 5 years, probably you're talking 99% ash mortality. The ash is going to die. Unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. One thing, if you're out there recreating a state forest, or even not even in state forest, can be private property, your own property, state parks, anywhere. The next couple of years, if you see ash trees that look really good, maybe the whole stream drainage, all the ash is dead, you find an ash tree or two that's living, doing very well, that'd be awesome if you could notify the Bureau of Forestry of that. There's some work being done, the U.S. Forest Service, what they're calling lingering ash. They're finding places that had emerald ash borer since the mid-2000s around Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. They're finding these ash trees that are doing pretty darn good. They're not sure if it's just a law of averages, where all of a sudden these trees were missed and they were never attacked by emerald ash borer and killed, or if there was some kind of maybe pheromone the tree produced where the adults did not want to lay eggs on it, or if the tree actually produces some kind of chemical which actually inhibited the growth of the actual larva. So if you do find that in the next few years here, let us know, because it might not sound important as one tree, but one or two of those trees could possibly make the difference between keeping a species from going extinct. One thing we're doing in state forests, different districts throughout the state, is we're actually treating trees for emerald ash borer with a systemic pesticide that you actually inject into the tree's vascular system. It's in the hopes of trying to preserve a seed source out there in the landscape. We have 200 trees we're treating on Delaware State Forest, broken down into probably about maybe 10 to 12 different locations, trying to save male and female trees, a little bit of different genetic material at each site. We're just hoping to keep them alive, that we have those species out there that if we ever get the opportunity to figure out a valid way to deal with emerald ash borer, say a native insect that feeds on it, some kind of biocontrol method, maybe a non-native insect that we can bring over here to actually attack the emerald ash borer, or again, too, those are all trees that possibly you could then keep the seed source going to grow in an arboretum, a more of a controlled environment where you could prevent something from going extinct. It's a long shot, but those ash trees, those lingering ash trees, could possibly be something that saves the species.
All right. Speaking of insects we don't want around, what about spotted lanternfly?
We're seeing that start to show up here in Pike County. It's been in Monroe County now for a couple of years. You're seeing it. As far as really mortality of the overstory dominant trees, we haven't really saw that yet. Sure, it can happen from trees that are already weakened from, say, gypsy moth defoliations, period drought, root issues, those sort of things. It's pretty new. It's been here, I think, since 2014 is the first time it's been discovered. So you're talking 7 years it's been here. But we're really not seeing a lot of big effects to the forest itself. You're seeing a lot more effects to more of the agricultural nursery production, orchards, vineyards, and again, it's a big problem with homeowners. As they feed, they actually excrete a material which is known as honeydew, has a lot of sugars in them, and it actually gets on your outdoor deck, your furniture, your siding, your cars. And since it's so high in sugar, you actually get a lot of mold and bacteria that'll actually grow on it, called sooty mold. Can become a pretty unsightly issue. But again, that sooty mold we saw at places down in south central Pennsylvania, Southeast PA, down around the Reading area, where that sooty mold was so predominant on the understory vegetation that it actually choked them out. And they actually weren't able to go through photosynthesis, those plants, just because they were covered with that sooty mold, and they actually died as a result. I think the spotted lanternfly is one of the things we're just going to have to sit here and watch for the next few years, unfortunately, but it doesn't really seem to be having a real tremendous impact to the forest, at least right now anyway.
All right. I know we're getting close to time. Right now, we have 2 more questions in the chat. Are you okay to take them?
Oh yeah, I'm good, Sarah. I have nothing scheduled after this. I'm good to go.
All right. One is a question about boat registrations and whether they would need to have a registered craft in order to use any of the lakes in the forest.
Yep, you need to have your boat either has to be registered, like you would take register a larger boat with the Fish and Boat Commission, or if you have a smaller boat, I forget what the cutoff is for the registrations. I don't deal with them myself. I don't have a bigger boat. I just have kayaks, and I use the launch permit. I buy them. They're $20 for 2 years. I get them at my local place that I buy fishing license and hunting license it as, and also buy them online. But you either need for a boat, you need to have that fishing boat registration, or you need to have that launch permit that's issued by the Bureau of Forestry or Fish and Boat Commission. You need to have either of those to be on one of our waters.
All right. And then the last question was in regards to the 10% of timber proceeds. And they wanted to know where the other 90% go.
That goes back to the Pennsylvania General Fund.
All right. And the rest of that question, Paul, I can talk with you about offline. But that's it for now. If anyone has any other last minute questions they'd like to pop into the chat, feel free at this time. Otherwise, it is 1 o'clock. If you haven't had lunch yet, please go ahead and enjoy. And thank you to everyone for attending today. Like I said, our next presentation will be April 27th at 12 p.m. with a representative from Michaud State Forest, which is in the southern part of the state. And enjoy the rest of your day.